Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, our mini-STEMposium to support teachers in the field. This is the first of 18 webinars we are hosting. This session has 715 people registered. My name is Ken Heydrich, and I am the National STEM Manager for Accelerate Learning. I'll be your host today for an incredible afternoon of learning. I've been in K-16 public education for over 30 years. Connecting with educators in the field, like today, is the best part of my day. Thank you for being here. We have lined up some exceptional talent from around the country for these mini-STEMposiums. This week, we are offering 6 sessions during the afternoon. We also will host 6 sessions during June 16 through 18 and 6 sessions during July 14 through 16. The link to the schedule is found in the chat window. Some of our national superstars include Peter McLaren, who's speaking today, Roger Bybee, Oki Lee, Larry Plank, David Crother, Rita McDonald, and Kelly Price Colley. We also have some local trailblazers from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including Shane Woods, Linda Cook, and Malachi Eubank. In addition, we have some of our best presenters from Accelerate Learning featured during the webinars. As you know, these are challenging times. Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes want to support our hardworking teachers by offering these sessions of high-quality professional learning. Nothing in return. We are just trying to provide some meaningful professional experiences, free. We are trying to take your mind off the pandemic for a moment. Please note that the participation of our major invited speakers does not necessarily mean an endorsement of products developed by Accelerate Learning. We are in challenging times. The speakers, along with me and my colleagues, are here to provide a rich learning experience so that teachers can take back with them some useful information and strategies to their students. We are all in this together. Before we begin, let me share some procedural aspects to this webinar. As you know, we're using Zoom, which has a limited number of interactive features. Please look at your sound and voice video controls found in the bottom left side of your screen. Your sound should be muted. Please make sure you have muted your sound with the red diagonal line. We also recommend that you use the speaker view on your video display found at the top right corner. Let's try one feature now called polling. Let me release a quick poll to see who we have participating today. Take a few moments and mark the category that best describes you. About 10 more seconds. Okay, let me close the poll. 3, 2, 1. So let's look at the results here. So this is who we have in the webinar today. Primarily teachers. It looks like the middle school teachers are a little bit ahead of the pre-K through 5 and 9-12. And we also have some administrators from the campus and district level. That is great. Thank you again for being here today. We really appreciate that. The next feature I want to talk about is chat. We will be using the chat feature today for your comments and questions. This window is being monitored by our STEMscope staff, and they will be able to respond when necessary. We will also use a Zoom function called Breakout Rooms. Our presenter will be able to randomly group people into smaller rooms for discussion. Okay, that's it for the procedures. Today, we are fortunate to have Peter McLaren from Rhode Island. I've known Peter for about 15 years, and he is an exceptional STEM educator, leader, and also one of the best joke tellers I know. Peter is the Executive Director of Next Gen Education. He is a member of the NGSS writing team, the Next Generation Science Standards writing team. He was a member of the NRC committees for developing assessments for the NGSS and seeing students learn science. And he is also a Millikan Family National Award winner, one of the highest recognitions of our practicing educators. Peter, we are so fortunate to have you with us today to share your expertise and insights. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for being here to hear from Peter McLaren. Peter, take it away. Peter, you need to unmute yourself, I think.
There we go. Sorry about that. Before we get going, first thing I want to do in all sincerity and with every bit of emotion I can share, thank you to all the teachers, not just because you're joining today, but for what you're doing every single day, especially since this COVID-19 crisis has started mid-March. You have been true heroes. We hear so much, and well-deserved, about the healthcare workers and the first responders being unsung heroes. But in my estimation, what you did plunging into distance learning without a lot of training, and what you've accomplished, you all are my heroes. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. Ken gave me a nice introduction, but let me tell you who I am. It's more important to be able to think about where you're from. And I am from the great state of Rhode Island. And even though Rhode Island is the smallest state in the country, we were the first state to adopt the next generation science standards. And what's significant about that is, you know, you don't really want to be first in anything necessarily when you're talking about initiative, because when you're first, you don't have anybody that's looking around and that can support you. But we've made great inroads since 2013 when we were adopted. And my experience has been not only just as an NGSS writing team member, but I was also the state science specialist at that time, bringing the states through the NGSS adoption. And today we have 44 states that either have adopted or adapted next generation science standards. So what I want to be able to do today is, and this is going to be challenging, but I know we can do it. I want to be able to work in teams. So in other words, we're going to be putting you into breakout rooms. And when you're working in those breakout rooms, I'm going to have you focus on explanation of some phenomena that I'm going to be sharing with you. And then what we're going to do with these learnings from the breakout rooms, we're going to build on how teachers can construct prompts to structure student thinking, as well as using practices to be able to have students explain phenomenon and solve problems. But first, and this is where I'm going to ask you to use the chat box. Answer this question in your chat box. What is keeping you awake at night relative to engaging students in 21st century skills? So just take a minute and go to your chat box and enter in a response to this particular slide. Thank you, and I'll check back to you in a minute.
So there are lots of things coming in from the chat. Some things that are keeping them awake at night are technology and distance learning, but also hands-on learning, just having some time to include that phenomena. Lots of wonderful things coming in. Let's see, so fast. They have another one about how do we engage our students? What about project-based learning or student-driven learning?
These are great. These are really, really, well, some are expected. The distance learning, maybe 3 months ago, it probably wouldn't be getting those types of responses, but certainly it's something that is prevalent now. Jessica, anything else did you see? Well, one of the things that I want you to be aware of as we go through this presentation, I heard how do we engage students? How do we stimulate students towards to be able to drive their own learning? And especially in case with distance learning where you are working, we're not working at a face-to-face, but how do you prompt students and how are you going to be able to engage students despite the fact that you're speaking with a computer and they're speaking with a computer? So my hope is that at the end of this presentation, a lot of your questions will be answered. And more importantly, we may be able to build on some of the learnings from this particular presentation to be able to take back into your distance learning environment. So I want to start off with this, WDTFS. And I know many of you probably have bracelets like this for different causes. WDTFS really relates to a vision where all students will be engaged in science and engineering practices structured by cross-cutting concepts to develop a deeper understanding of the core ideas of science and engineering. This does not mean that mathematics is exclusive or literacy, but when we talk about the opportunity to bring students together to be able to embrace their own learning, it's this document on the right-hand side of your screen that is most important. It's the framework for K-12 science education. It is a compendium of research dating back to the early 90s and also embracing the past standards. So it is current and it is the basis for what we use to be able to guide science education and most notably STEM education as we move forward. By the way, there's a URL, and I believe Jessica's going to put in the chat box, where you can actually download this for free, as you can for any document that's at the National Academies Press. So look in the chat box and you can do that. So let's start off. What are 21st century skills? 21st century skills, I remember when we were talking about these skills that we're trying to aim towards at the end of the 90s, 21st century skills seem very futuristic. We are now in the 21st century. So this is where we're living. This is where the students are living. This is where the students are preparing themselves. And so I want you to look at this slide and really think about the three strands that we see here. Review the foundational literacies. Now, obviously, you have scientific literacy, numeracy, literacy, ICT. Think about STEM. And if you think about STEM as an acronym that represents science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you can't do that without literacy. You can't do that without translating into financial literacy. So all of these literacies are important, incredibly important for STEM literacy. Now look at the center strand, competencies. I would argue that every one of you there that are involved with the classroom education of students would be trying to cultivate critical thinking in their students, embracing creativity and trying to amplify that. How can you get students to be able to communicate and, more importantly, collaborate? And on the right-hand side, curiosity. How do we invest in curiosity? Embrace that natural, organic quality that all of us have, that curiosity, and don't extinguish it. And drive it into initiative. And don't give up. If something fails, don't give up and have them keep moving on. That's the persistence and the grit. How do you adapt? How do you lead? And lastly, how do you embrace the many cultures that are out there, not only cultures of diversity, but also social cultures? How do you get along with people? And this is where we're winding up. We're trying to get students to be able to take those 21st century skills and translate these into the workforce. And I would argue not just the workforce, but when they go into extended learning, into college, and to move forward to make choices as far as what direction they want to go to. If you just scan through this, this is the top 10 skills for future workforce that were brought together, that industries are kind of pointing to as far as what they are looking for the future workers. Sense making, obviously, to be able to take something and go deeper. Transdisciplinarity, so that it's not just about one size fits all. You need to be able to apply it over a number of courses, a number of subjects, a number of domains. And I can go on, but I think you're getting the point here. This is the goal, to have our students ready to be able to embrace the world that we all live in. And if we can really move forward with this, and one of the things I really wanted to shout out to is I had the opportunity of standing on the shoulders of many, many very bright and gifted researchers and educators. This slide came from a publication put forward by Brett Molding with Roger Bybee and Nicole Paulson. I had the pleasure of working with Brett and Roger on the national writing team, along with Jill Krajcek and Carrie Snyder and Stephen Pruitt, and I can go on. But this slide really makes sense to me, because if you look at the left going to the right, when you have students that you can really engage, if you think about in your classroom where you know the kids are really getting it, chances are you've seen this aha moment, the left hand, where they're seeing something that's really getting their attention. They're wondering about it. They're deeply observing it, and they're asking questions as a result of that. And the natural path is that once you have students engaged, students will on their own try to find out more questions, more information and data. They want to be able to generate that information somehow, to be able to find out more about what they've just observed. And then taking that information and reasoning with it, constructing an explanation. And this explanation may not be the correct explanation at the time, but it's something that they're building upon. And so curiosity, interest, and reasoning is really the through point of what we try to do in the classroom every day. Stimulate the students to be able to generate their own interests and to be able to reason with information to be able to get a better understanding of the world around them. And so today, what we're looking at is, if we look at how the framework has affected state science standards, if you look on the left-hand side, this is how I was trained some years ago, to be able to think about facts, to be able to think about the teacher providing the information, to be able to put out worksheets. Oh my goodness gracious, I minimized the worksheets, but those days, oh my goodness, I can still remember that. In fact, I want to be able to, if this is a 12-step program, I would probably sit back and say, hi, my name is Pete. I used to give worksheets out when I taught. I'm not proud of it, but it's the way we were trained. Look on the right-hand side. This is where we're coming as a result of the framework. And if you look at the number of times students lead off those points, it's moving from a teacher-centered to a student-centered type of environment where the teacher is facilitating, the students are actually owning their work. Sorry about that. So if we look at this, two areas that we're really going to focus on. One is phenomenon. And the next point that we're going to be working with is how to be able to get students to discuss open-ended questions. And I can probably see you all out there saying, oh yeah, tell me how to do that. It's not easy. To get students to talk, that you've got to have a magic wand. Well, we hope that what we can do at the end of this session is we'll be able to really discuss this more deeply and have a entry point where students will not have to answer, they will want to answer open-ended questions. Now, my last name being McLaren, and every time I see the 3 dimensions of the framework, I think of my sainted grandmother who came over from County Roscommon in Ireland, and she would call this, oh, look at this, it's like the Trinity is. Look at it, there's science and engineering practices, there's cross-cutting concepts, and there's disciplinary core ideas. Well, I won't go so far as calling them the Trinity, but they all work together in the same way that the Trinity perception all connects at one particular point. And if you look at the science and engineering practices, think of these practices as tools. Think about what the students, if the students could be able to put on a tool belt, each of these practices would be a particular tool that the student would use to be able to explain a phenomenon or to solve a problem. And if you look at cross-cutting concepts, I would argue that if you just read through those, students would have a innate understanding, albeit depending on where they are in their K-12 progression, they would have an innate understanding of each of those cross-cutting concepts. Patterns are something that very, very young kids recognize. Cause and effect, if you do this, this is going to happen to you. And so on and so forth. So cross-cutting concepts, even though they are, they've been around for a while, that used to be called unifying themes in the former standards, the National Science Education Standards, cross-cutting concepts are not new, but they are key. And on the right-hand side, this is where everybody breathes a sigh of relief. This is something that every science teacher or every teacher of science would recognize. The stuff of science, the facts of science, the body of knowledge. And so when we look at these 3 together, what's different is that they are not separate. They are going to be used together integratively. And when you're talking about STEM, whether it's mathematics or whether it's science or whether it's engineering, this play, this way in which that you deepen in the use of practices with the information, the core ideas, is incredibly important. Let me give you an example. And again, I'm going back to my 12-step program. Hi, my name is Pete. I taught the scientific method. But as I became more involved in science education and more importantly, actually went out on a NOAA Teacher at Sea program where I actually work with scientists, the scientific method is not a really authentic thing. It really was something that was created to really kind of give a real broad stroke of inquiry. But it is certainly not what we remember it as being a very linear process where you wake up in the morning and you say, I've got a problem I want to solve. And then you move into the next phases of scientific method. Scientific method, science is not linear and science is not cyclical. It's can be very messy, but messy with an order. Let me give you an example of that. My friend Brett Molding, who I mentioned earlier, uses an instructional sequence called gather, reason, and communicate. And if you look in each of those categories, you'll see practices. On the right-hand side for gathering, obtaining information, asking questions, planning and carry out investigations, and so on and so forth. Notice that when they're gathering, there's specific practices they're using. When students are reasoning, there's specific practices they employ. And when they're communicating, specific practices. Let's go deeper. Notice here, we have some patterns going on. Notice that in blue, models can be used at all three phases. Students use models to be able to gain more of an understanding of an initial understanding of the phenomenon or problem. So they create a model to be able to explain what they're thinking. When they actually get more information, they can take models and revise their models based on evidence. And lastly, when they are going to be communicating their understanding, they can use those models to communicate. It's another example. There is a practice number 8, obtaining, evaluating, communicating information, that has many educators have a misconception that all occurs at one time. The way that this instructional strategy, the instructional structure goes, is that you really use the obtaining information portion of that practice when students are gathering information. This is actually a literacy-based practice. They're going to be looking at information they can gain from media, from books, from the web, what have you. Then they're going to evaluate it, take it and say, okay, what's useful about this? And then they're going to communicate this information. What have they learned as a result of it? So there's another aspect of how the phases work together. And lastly, I want to be able to point out there are some of these practices that are used very specifically for each instructional phase. Asking questions and defining problems would not necessarily be down in communicating. It would really be starting off where gathering is. And how do you plan and conduct an investigation that's going to generate evidence? That would be gathering information also. But in the reasoning part, you're going to be analyzing data. You will not get data until you do an investigation. And you're not going to be able to construct explanations unless you have evidence from the data or developing arguments so that you're using your understanding, your evidence to be able to argue with your classmates and come to consensus. So I hope this gives a little bit more understanding that these practices are not static. They're very strategic and they're used for specific portions of the instructional phase, whether that would be the gather, reasoning, communicating model, or Roger Bybee's, I give major credit to, for the 5E model. Both of those would have these practices used very strategically. And many of you have probably seen this, but this is a Venn diagram showing how math, science, and ELA would be able to work together. And if you look at how the mathematics has practices, science has practices, ELA has competencies. But if you look at the center, that sweet spot, that's where the evidence lives. It's all about constructing information, constructing understanding based upon evidence, which is incredibly important. So I'm going to ask Jessica, and I hope that this won't be a problem, but I'm going to ask you all to go and check at the chat box, and you should be able to download a breakout worksheet that looks something like this. It's not only having 2 horizontal rows that you can use for the breakouts, but it also has on it practices and cross-cutting concepts. Jessica, is that able to be loaded into the chat box?
Yes, Peter, it has been loaded into the chat box.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're going to use this worksheet for both of the breakout sessions that we're going to be engaging with. And so this is going to be our first breakout. In a minute, you're going to be going to a breakout, and what you're going to be charged with, and this is going to be, might be a little bit difficult, but when you go into a breakout, you may have a number of people in that breakout. and you want to come to some kind of consensus for the explanation of this phenomenon I'm going to show you. It's a phenomenon of a trapeze artist that falls on a safety net that is actually, she's doing this outside in the fall. And so take a look and observe particularly the behavior of the leaves that are on the safety net, and then construct an explanation using your partners, and use that worksheet, that breakout number 1 segment. Put your explanation right there. We want to try to get one explanation per breakout group if we can. And then we're going to discuss that. It's really important that something gets written down so you have an artifact. The phenomenon I'm going to show you, I'm going to play 3 times so you can observe it, and then we'll get you into the breakout. So let me go over to the phenomenon.
Peter, when you are ready for breakouts, we'll have 40 rooms with 6 or 7 participants in each room.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ken. So let's see if we can get to the phenomenon. And as I said, I will show this to you 3 times. Again, observe the leaves and write an explanation for what you're observing the leaves' behavior to be. Let me pray that back for you again.
Some chat feedback about what an awesome phenomena.
Glad to hear that. Again, observe the leaves. What is it that how can you come together and create an explanation of what's happening with the leaves? I'm sure every one of you want to be part of that trapeze art. It looks like she's having a lot of fun. And I'm going to play this one more time, and then I'm going to send you to the breakout rooms. So after this video, Ken, if you can move to the breakout, that would be great.
Will do. So check the chat window for the link to the worksheet. You may want to copy the link. Make sure you have it.
They're loving this phenomena, Peter.
I'm glad. By the way, you can find this if you Google Georgia Science Teachers Association phenomenon. There's a host of different phenomenon located at that site. So Georgia Science Teachers Association phenomenon. Okay, Ken, can we send them to the breakout rooms, and folks, you can follow exactly what we have on that worksheet.
Sure, Peter. How much time do you want in the breakout rooms?
I'm thinking 6 minutes, if that's possible.
I will set my timer for 6 minutes. Then you all will have 30 seconds to pull back to the main room. You've got the link in the chat. And here we go to 40 rooms with 6 or 7 participants.
Thank you.
You'll have to move into those.
New site.
Purpose saying,
Yes.
you know, December the 10th.
Okay, I'm going to close the breakout rooms. Got 30 seconds to come back. So Peter, I think everybody's back from the breakout rooms.
Excellent, excellent. So I really appreciate it. I had a chance to duck in on a few of the of the conversations. And this might be a little challenging. We have probably over 400 people on, but I would love to hear some explanations. I'm assuming that there's a raise hand function on Zoom. So maybe if someone might want to share what their explanation is with the group, we can take a few to be able to build upon. So I'll open it up to anyone that wants to share their explanation. Jessica, I cannot see the control panel for participants. So if you see someone with a hand raised, please. Oh, there's one. I can see you there.
Peter, it seemed that people couldn't type on the Google document.
Yeah, I gave people some permission, but I hope they can still download it and have that link so they can download it as a Word file if they'd like to.
Okay.
Yes, please. I just unmuted you. Lisa, if you want to be able to share your explanation.
I am taking an absolutely wild guess. I'm a kindergarten teacher for the first year, but I believe it has something to do with the person's weight versus the leaf's weight.
Okay, and that's a great perspective. And you're answering that in your perspective of what students, your kindergartners might be looking at. So I like the way that is coming out. So
Okay.
the weight of the person versus the weight of the leaf.
So I'm thinking the person went straight to the bottom because of her weight, and the leaves stayed atop of her because they're lighter than she.
Okay. Yep.
I'll listen for more ideas and ideas.
And by the way, this is a judgment-free zone.
Please don't judge.
It's like Planet Fitness. There's no right or wrong answer. So
Exactly. Okay.
thank you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you.
Someone else. We got a middle school, a high school?
So what about Pamela?
Pamela, please.
So Pamela may need her
Let's
unmute.
see where she is. Pamela, let me just search for that.
If you want to raise your hand, if you go to the participants logo on the bottom, there are different features there. And if you do the more, you can raise your hand.
So is it Pamela Joyner?
Yes,
Welcome.
Pamela Joyner has her hand raised.
All right, so I hope I just unmuted you. Let me do that again.
There she
There
is.
we go. There we go. Pamela, go right ahead. Tell me what grade do you teach, or what your position is?
Maybe, I don't know, maybe maybe they'll
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, my unmute wasn't on mute. So yes, I was thinking the same thing that they mentioned before, that the force of the person landing on the bottom made the leaves move up because they were lighter, and she was heavier. So it was the force of the pushing down, and then the leaves going up higher, and the movement had something to do with the movement as well, or the impact her when she went down. So how much force it was causing how much the leaves to move upward, making the leaves move upward.
Excellent. Good. Pam, what grade do you teach? Are you K-5, middle, high school?
I teach 6th grade.
And I was going to take a bet because now you're using a little bit more middle school language in there when you're talking about forces. So I appreciate that.
And Peter, we have some information coming in from the chat. Alana said the law of inertia. Another person said, Antonio said, unbalanced forces. And in our breakout session, another person mentioned Newton's laws.
These are all valid explanations. And more importantly, they are more authentic to what, depending on what your age group is. And as I said, I ducked into a few breakout rooms and I heard from some of the participants in the breakout rooms is saying, well, my kids wouldn't need 6 minutes to do this. They can be responded right away. But we have different levels depending on the perspective of the teachers. So this is really helpful. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Let me move this along a little bit. And believe me, when I do this as a face-to-face, it is much better, much richer to be able to have people actually share out, because people don't have a chance to hide from me. I'll pick them out and I'll ask them for an explanation, but we have a good time. So how would your explanation be different if you used a cross-cutting concept? Now, that breakout, that worksheet that I gave you has on the left-hand side, on the second page, has the practices. On the right-hand side says cross-cutting concepts. So think about your explanation that you just gave, whether you gave it to us orally by the webinar, or whether or not you just wrote it down. What we're going to do in a minute is go back to the breakouts. And all I'm going to ask you is take the explanation, like for instance, when Pam talked about it's the weight of the person versus the leaf weight. What Pam is going to do is infuse one of the cross-cutting concepts into that explanation to be able to go deeper. And so one of these, and this is primarily what you have on your worksheet, what you do is within your breakout group, revise the explanation for the phenomenon of the behavior of the leaves on the safety net and use one cross-cutting concept. Okay, and I promise I'll tie this all together when we come back. Is everybody clear with that? Does anybody have any questions? And see if there's any, if you do, raise your hand, but I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yes, I think they understood a couple of questions about writing in the document. If you are having trouble with writing in the document, don't worry. You don't have to write in the document. You can just have that discussion or write it down on paper.
Exactly.
And they are loving this. So
Great.
thank you, Peter.
Thank you. And I apologize for that with the Google Sheet, but I would trust that people have some scratch paper clear by and
Yeah.
can write out some explanations.
And Faith just said you can always make a copy. So thank you, Faith.
That's right. That's right. All right. So can we put them back into the breakouts? I trust that they're going to go in the same breakouts again so they can work on the same explanations. So I'll turn this
I
over.
will be happy to do that. I'm not sure if they will go back into the same or if it's just a random selection. And how long do you want them in the breakout rooms, Peter?
Let's go a little bit lighter. Let's try 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Yeah, it shouldn't
All
be.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, when you get your invite, please go to your breakout room for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, I think we might be able to give them the 30-second warning now, if that's okay.
I just gave him a 1 minute warning a little bit ago.
Oh, great, fine. We're on the same page then. Thank you.
Yep.
Look like people are coming back.
Great conversations, Peter. We talked a lot about cross-cutting concepts and, maybe narrowing the focus to a couple of cross-cutting concepts when you're doing the phenomena.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Jessica. Ken, does it look like we're back? It looks like
We are up to 224 participants. 3 people have raised their hand.
okay. Jessica.
Paul Gallagher. Paul?
I was going to say if either you, Ken, or Jessica can.
Hi, Paul.
How are y'all? Thank you so much, calling from Rockwall, Texas. I am a 5th grade math and science teacher, going to be going into 4th grade. We discussed that from our cross-cutting concepts that we could use cause and effect when you are talking about, like Newton's law and, how motion obviously at rest will stay at rest until she fell down and put everything else back into motion, put the leaves into motion, as well as patterns. You could see that there were patterns involved in the way the leaves fell, the way she fell, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. Excellent. So using Newton's law as the cause of the leaves moving was due to the person falling on the leaves, but there's also what caused them to stay stationary was a lack of interaction. And the patterns were clearly in there. So you saw patterns with your evidence. Thank you. Do we have someone else that wants to go? Jessica, you see another hand raised?
I do see another hand raised. How about Anna? So I just need to unmute. Oh, there's Anna. She's ready.
Hi, I'm Anna from Wichita, Kansas, and let me get my document pulled up. I'm sorry. We did our revised explanation with cross-cutting concept. The cause is the force of the lady's body hitting the net, and the effect is that both the leaves and the net change position. Initially, the force was first directed at the net, and then gravity is a secondary force that pulls the leaves down. And we were mostly, I think we had a few middle school teachers and then a kindergarten teacher.
That's beautiful. That is excellent. That's actually bringing tears to my eyes. That's a great explanation. Thank you. Cause and effect. Does anybody use something, a cross-cutting concept other than cause and effect?
Our teachers in our breakout room talked about stability and change.
Ah, okay. I'd love to hear how that explanation would use those in there. I can imagine, but I don't want to put words in people's mouths.
So we were having so much fun talking about the cross-cutting concepts and how we could narrow the focus to certain ones that we did not get to revise our whole statement. But we do have a few more in the chat. One person said, we discussed that the elementary level kids might identify cause and effect as a cross-cutting concept present, but at the high school level, there might be flexibility to have students use cause and effect or energy and systems.
Excellent. That's great.
Let's see.
So in the interest of time, and I would love to, there was nothing I would love better than just have this, this discussion go longer. But I want to give you the aha with this. I want you to sit back and think about when you were watching that video. Whether you realize it or not, all I did was say, observe the behavior of the leaves. In your mind's eye, to quote Shakespeare, you actually looked at that phenomenon through the lens of a particular cross-cutting concept. You may not have known that, but you're looking at a question. What would have caused that? Oh, this did cause that. Or what about the energy that was involved? How did it affect the transfer energy? Or it was nice and stable, and then all of a sudden when a force was acting on it, now that stability became more dynamic. And so I want you to really think about that and think as a student. All I did was say observe, and you gave a number of different explanations, all valid. But think about it from a cross-cutting concept standpoint. Think about from a teacher standpoint. If you put forward the best laid plans of you may be writing a lesson plan that you think is going to be in the Journal of Science Teaching, and then you go and do it in the classroom, and kids have all these different answers. Why? Because of the fact that they're looking at the same phenomenon, but they have different ideas about that phenomenon. What I asked you to do was, in a way, reveal what it was that you were what lens you were looking through. Many of you looking through cause and effect. Some of you looking through stability. Some of you looking through energy. But you all were focusing. If you're a teacher, you may have a lot of different answers, but I'm going to show you how you can allow students to be able to focus on the cross-cutting concept for the phenomenon and how that's going to be able to help eliminate a lot of the noise that students are using. So cross-cutting concepts, I won't go there. I'm just putting this out there because that particular phenomenon is aligned to this particular performance expectation from the next generation science standard. You can't get an outcome to this particular performance expectation in one lesson. This takes a lot of lessons. But if you look at this, you can see that you're building a phenomenon that would add to the understanding of this particular performance expectation as an outcome. And this is the middle school. However, that same phenomenon you use in elementary, and you use it also in high school. But let me just show you a little bit. Think about these cross-cutting concepts. We always think of them as linear. Let's think about them, how they work together, because this is probably how you think about them. Causality is really when what causes something to happen. And you can argue that cause and effect and structure and function are measures of causality. And systems, you have a system and a system model, but in that system, you can talk about the scale, you can talk about the proportion, you can talk about how much stuff is in the system, you can talk about whether or not the system is stable or whether it's dynamic, and whether energy is flowing into and out of, or matter is cycling into and out of. And look over on the right-hand side, patterns, standalone. Why? Because that's normally one of the cross-cutting concepts a lot of, not just students, you all probably use when they're noticing something and then stop that wonder, observe, and question status. So it's all focusing on phenomenon. So if you have a phenomenon, you're going to be looking to see what are the cause and effect relationships. And then once you have those cause and effect relationships, what's the system that you're going to be investigating within that phenomenon? And then looking at patterns that might serve as evidence. All of these are valid. And notice that the arrows go back and forth. It's not linear. You can start anywhere around there to be able to go after phenomenon. And this is what students do naturally. As teachers, you're going to help structure them. So going back to the instructional phase from Brett Molding, this is where they're not only being structured through the cross-cutting concept to look at a phenomenon and aspect, but now they get to use their practices to figure it out. So I'm going to do this somewhat quickly, but I'm just going to do this phenomenon really quickly, and probably you've all seen this before. Okay, this is a quick video. Let me play that again. Okay. So we were going to have a poll here, but in the interest of time, we're probably not going to be able to do that. But I'm going to ask you all just to take a quick look at these prompts and questions derived from this tanker gun. In other words, these prompts and questions, if that phenomenon was something you're going to be showing to your classroom, which one of these prompts or would these prompts or questions help you to be able to convey to the students what you want them to observe? So just take a minute and look at those. And as a teacher, these are the questions and prompts that I would have in my back pocket, or sometimes create on the fly when I see kids that might be a little confused, and I'll pull these out and I ask the students this question. And every once in a while I say, why aren't they getting it? What's going on? Well, I'll show you. If you take away the scaffolding of the cross-cutting concepts and you read those prompts, would the student know what aspect of the phenomenon you want them to look at? Would they know to look for patterns? Would they know to look for cause and effect? Would they know to look for structure and function? Probably not. And this is what they explained. The aha moment for me is that now I understand why kids were having such a tough time. So what I would do is, these are actually prompts from past workshops. What I did was I asked them to go back and say, okay, make it explicit. Just like your explanation, put in the cross-cutting concept you want the students to look at. What kind of patterns can be observed? What could be some of the possible causes? What describe and draw the phenomenon at scale? And so now, by asking students to do that, they are now going to focus on the aspect that you as a teacher are deciding for the lesson, and eliminates that noise of multiple explanations, all valid, but less confusing, because now they're going to be looking at a specific point. And so we go back to, here's where the 3 dimensions come in. They're learning more about a core idea through the phenomenon. They're using the practices as their tools to be able to dig out, but most importantly, they can't dig it out until they look at the aspect they're trying to dig out from. That's where the cross-cutting concepts come into play. But here's the thing, folks. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. The cross-cutting concepts, I would argue that this 3-dimensionality, when we're talking about not just about STEM with science, but also in mathematics, we have multiple dimensions of practices, use them together. If it was so easy, everybody get a t-shirt. But here's the so what. it's a common language. Using the practices are essential, but in order for students to really gain an understanding, the teacher needs to use cross-cutting concepts in their language. Think about your explanations. When the students write an explanation with a cross-cutting concept within it, now you know they're getting it. They're talking about something specific. And if you're asking them to write something, don't forget to ask them for the evidence of what they're writing about. They can't just write down the cause was gravity. What's the evidence behind it? What is the what's the claim that you're supporting that for? By the way, STEMteachingtools.org, a great resource to be able to go to. And here's another couple of points. I want you to think of cross-cutting concept as basically the blinders. In other words, it eliminates the noise that students have swirling around them when they see a phenomenon for the first time. It focuses students. But they are only effective when not just you as a teacher in grade X, but if grades K2, 4, 6, 8, all the teachers throughout the continuum use cross-cutting concept at different sophistications, then they become a familiar touchstone. And so someone that's in a 9th grade earth science class can react to cross-cutting concepts similar to what they did in 1st grade with different sophistication. And again, the practices are what the students are going to be using to figure it out once they focus on the phenomenon, the aspect they're looking for. And so I'm going to shout out to a colleague of mine, Sean Elkins, because I'm sure that you all are probably saying, oh, I'm already doing that. I'm already doing that in the classroom. Well, let me say something about this. Sean Elkins, a good friend of mine, a colleague from Kentucky, he came up with this principle. We already do that, right? The proportion of those that already do that is inversely proportional to the number that say they already do that. In other words, just because you say you already do that, you're not doing it. It takes practice, it takes collaboration. And so this is a document that might be helpful for you. tinyurl.com, that's just the place, but remember, Next Steps CCCs. You can download this document, and it's something that I had the honor of working with many states to be able to create this, and where the learning from cross-cutting concepts really came into play. But to summarize this, you really want to think about the practices that the students are doing to be able to figure out a phenomenon. They're going to be using the cross-cutting concept to focus in on an aspect. The phenomenon is going to reveal to the students a better understanding of the core idea you want them to dig into. And I don't care if you're teaching social studies, mathematics, any other subject, English and language arts, those cross-cutting concepts can play across on that, I would argue. If you're looking at cause in a literal passage, it still works that way. You're focusing them in. So I'm gonna be signing off in a minute, but I am, as you can probably tell, my Southern friends can probably tell, I have a typical New England accent, but I am a diehard Red Sox fan, and for me to put pinstripes on a screen is like not good for me. But I'm putting that up there. A friend of mine was a huge Yankee fan, and he told the story about how towards the end of his career, Joe DiMaggio was hurting and he was injured, and one of his teammates said, "Don't go out, just take the day off." And he said, "There's somebody out there that hasn't seen me play, that came to see me play." And he went out every day because of that. That is what you all do as teachers every single day, and especially now in this day of distant learning. The way you all stepped up and the way you make a difference for students, this is my wish for you. I want you to have a Joe DiMaggio day when you get back in that classroom and every time you get in that classroom. So I appreciate the time you gave me. I've got a few minutes, but I'm going to turn this over to Ken. That's my contact information. I live by myself with a cat. So if you have any questions, the cat can't answer the phone, please let me know. I'd be glad to talk with you. Thank you all. Ken, back to you. I'll give you the screen.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. You shared a lot of relevant insights about the practices that will engage and help our students. You also have shown how the cross-cutting concepts are making the content come alive for students. Thank you, Peter. To follow up, we will now post a certificate of participation into the chat window. We will also post a short 5-question survey about this webinar. We would love to have some feedback from you. The webinar has been recorded and will be available on the mini-STEMposium website next week, along with a PDF of the slides that Peter shared today. Please remember that we will have additional webinars this week, and we have 6 webinars in June and 6 webinars in July. You are welcome to go online and register for those also. On behalf of Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes, we appreciate you taking time today to participate in these learning experiences. Thank you and be safe.
Thank you, everyone.